Before we begin, the Differently Brained team wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we record, edit and stream this podcast. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples and their elders, past, present and future. We extend our respect to all First Nations cultures and recognise their ongoing connection to the lands, waterways and communities.
Just a reminder that Differently Brained shares conversations about mental health and neurodivergence. Sometimes these topics can get a bit heavy, so please remember to check in with yourself before listening. And as always, please reach out for help if our chats have brought anything up for you. Now on with the show.
Hello everybody who is listening to this podcast called Differently Brained. Welcome to Differently Brained. My name is Lachlan Rutherford. How are you? How are you going?
Are you asking me? Are you asking us?
No,
are you asking the
I
listener?
can.
Have you ever noticed that other podcasts just have the same opening every single time? And it's like, it's scripted and it's easy and there's no confusion?
Nah, bugger that.
Anyway, I've taken over now.
Introduce yourself. How rude. Introduce yourself.
I'm obviously Jacinta Dietrich. And today we have a guest. We mostly have guests. Sometimes we don't, though. But I'm very excited about this one because we've been waiting a while. We have Hayley Scrivenor on the podcast. Hayley is the author of Dirt Town, which was published internationally in 2022, published as Dirt Creek in the US, where it was a USA Today bestseller, fancy lady, and quickly became a #1 Australian bestseller as well. The novel has been shortlisted for multiple national and international awards. The list is huge, and translated into several languages. In 2023, Dirt Town won the ILP John Creasy New Blood Dagger, the Lambda Literary Award for LGBTQ+ Mystery, and the ARBIA for General Fiction Book of the Year. Her second novel, Girl Falling, will be out now, basically at the time of releasing this. Hayley has a PhD in creative writing from the University of Wollongong and lives on Dharawal country on the east coast of Australia. Hayley, you fancy lady, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and that's a lovely intro. Thank you. But I need to start by saying how much I love this podcast, and I really love what you guys do. I'm someone who gets a lot of comfort from, I guess, listening to people talking about brains and bodies. And while I don't personally identify as neurodiverse, I've struggled with anxiety my whole life. And I think there's something so affirming and so community building about what you guys do. So I'm really happy to be here, even though I feel like a bit of a crime writing imposter.
Not at all, but
in this space, you've had such amazing guests that I'm just happy to kind of be in the mix. And I'm really happy to have a conversation with you today. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, Hayley, you woo us. No one else has immediately taken over the podcast to compliment us. And I really think that future guests should take note because that was lovely. Thank you. Well, you already opened the discussion for us. You have struggled with anxiety. Hit us with it. Tell us about it.
Yeah, look, I think it's something that has been really interesting in writing my second book because I've been in active therapy since before. I sort of started therapy while I was writing Dirt Town, and my therapist gets an acknowledgement in Girl Falling, my second novel, as she should, because we wouldn't be here without Alex. And the thing about Alex is she has a German accent, so I always feel like I'm getting therapy at double speed. Just because it's in a German accent. I don't know how it works, but it just makes you feel like you're kind of doing it properly.
It's more authentic when it's German.
Why do you think I shouldn't do the, I promise myself I wouldn't do the accent on any kind of recorded, because I'm terrible at accents. I'm not good at them. But I think this idea that you are someone with a brain and a body, and in fact you feel like everybody else has been issued a brain and a body that works correctly, whatever that means. And in fact your job is just to kind of figure out what operating system you have been installed with and work with that. And the best and most sort of fail-safe technique is self-compassion. So I feel like writing has forced me to confront my brain in a lot of ways. Like, I feel like when I had an office job or even when I was studying, I could kind of go to work and do stuff and kind of push everything to later hours and kind of deal with that in my own time. But there's something about confronting your brain and trying to commit and make something like a long-term project, like a book, which is just you and your brain and the laptop.
Yeah.
That really meant I had to work out some strategies because I was so paralyzed by fear. I was so paralyzed by this sort of really, I always think of it as a very physical thing, like an incredibly embodied sensation. It never felt like something that was happening in my mind. It felt like something that was happening in my gut and my chest. You know?
I completely understand that. It does. It really does feel like that.
And the best thing is to talk about it. And I try to be really open about the fact that I go to therapy because I think pretty much everyone should be in therapy if they can afford it, which everyone should be able to. I think that the willingness to be open about your own stuff often encourages other people to feel comfortable to talk to you about what's going on with them. I'm endlessly fascinated by people and how they work. And I also find myself in an interesting position where in crime writing, you often are kind of showing people on the worst days of their lives, right? Or you have people doing things that are quite outlandish or unbelievable, and you have to bring the reader along with you to help explain how we've gotten to that point. I feel like most of my books, I've written 2 books, but
Yeah.
all my 2 books are really interested in this idea of like, I think almost anyone can get to almost any point if enough things kind of go a certain way. But which is, it's also interesting because as a crime writer, you often come up against the fact that you're kind of doing this for entertainment in a way. Like I really care about these questions of what can push a person to do things they wouldn't do, but also being aware of how you do that kind of in a way that is well written and is good from a craft point of view and is like in line with my values as someone who wants to not kind of do these things in a way that feels exploitative.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why I think it's hard. Like I was really looking forward to having this conversation because I'm curious what you guys think about crime and where, if you read much crime and whether you kind of notice this thing where sometimes someone has something wrong with them, quote unquote, and that can kind of become enough to, just depictions of mental health and things in books, I think are interesting and certainly something that I brush up against in this book and was worried about as I was writing it.
I think it's really interesting the way that you talk about because it really comes across in the book. I think one of the first things that I said to Lachlan when I finished Girl Falling, which is just such an impressive book, was that it feels like a really in-depth character study inside a crime novel.
Yeah.
Like I think I come to crime, like I'm a big baby. I'm very soft. I read things and I'm like, that's going to happen to me. So I'm not huge in the crime sphere, despite making an awful lot of friends in the crime area. I don't know what's happened. I just like you guys.
If it makes you feel better, Jacinta, I can't read crime before bed. Like I just can't. I'm so stressful. Yeah, I can't consume that content. So I have to like make time in the daytime to read my friends' books. Right?
But what I loved about yours, I think, I come to crime with that idea that it is very like schlocky and action-packed. And, I think I had a particular kind of idea of what crime is. And maybe that's what it was when I, was growing up and in high school when I first tried reading crime and things like that. But I think the thing that I absolutely love about Girl Falling and Dirt Town as well is that it is so character focused and, it is still very plotty and things are happening and it's exciting and there is the entertainment value, but it doesn't feel like what I imagine traditional crime might be like. It's really, really interesting to me where it doesn't fall into the parts of crime that I don't necessarily love. It falls into that, that character reflection and the how do people get to this place. And I think you really do handle mental health and different people in a really, really accessible way. Like I don't think you ever use mental health issues as like they're just like that because of X. It's always really nuanced and complex and you build a whole person rather than, what I've seen other people do where it's just like, oh yeah, they're just nuts because XYZ and it's kind of explained away.
What's great about crime is it's such a broad church. Like there really is so much variety in what you can do. And I think some of the main tenets, though, are that you kind of promise that things are going to happen, and you also promise that it's all going to come together at the end, which other genres don't always make that same promise. And it's kind of, if you're going to be in that crime space, and I really want to keep being able to go to the festivals because they're really fun. And so, and all of my friends are crime writers at this point, but like, okay, I've got to stay in this. I've got to honor that promise. But I think there is a lot of scope within that. And I guess what can be hard is that on a reality level, so seldom in life do we actually get to fully understand what happened.
Yeah.
Like anyone who's ever been a human being who's had a problem knows, like, at some point you often just have to sit with not knowing. And that might be a diagnosis, or that might be, you know, like this idea of a clear understanding of why someone did something is often denied us in life. And I think that's one of the appeals of crime. And then as I'm navigating that, I'm also trying not to do that in a way that's just like, her sister died and that's why, you know, she's this way or whatever.
Yeah. The thing that I find with crime in particular, like as like fictional crime, because I've got all sorts of thoughts about true crime as a genre. I'd have all sorts of like hang-ups, I guess, but when it comes to fictional crime, it's a little bit more, I guess, freeing, because it doesn't feel as voyeuristic as true crime does. But the thing that is an issue, I would imagine, when you're trying to write it is, like, as you said, trying to portray this character as being nuanced in a particular way that doesn't necessarily become a reductive, she is this way because this happened kind of thing. And I guess that, like, while you're doing that, I mean, I don't know. I always, when I wrote in the past, I haven't written in a very long time, but
writing is a very patient form, Lachlan. It will always be.
Yeah, well.
but we're
like,
not ballet dancers, you know? Like, it's always waiting for you.
I will return to it at some point, maybe, we'll see. but in any case, when I would have these sort of ideas swirling around in my head of how to approach something sensitive, such as mental illness or, you know, a crime or whatever, that would almost like cause paralysis and stop me from actually doing the thing. Like, it would actually fire up my anxiety. Does that happen to you? And if so, like, how do you manage that? Do you just like write through it?
It's interesting, you know, because I feel like the honest answer to how I've come to write what I write is that I joke that I always write, like, I had a feeling once and now you're all going to have to hear about it, basically. Like,
I love that so much.
And so I often write from feelings that I'm still trying to understand and that are very intense and that are maybe, I mean, I hesitate to say disproportionate, but like I'm definitely, so take Dirt Town, my first novel, which is the story of a girl who goes missing, right? Really, that book started because I wanted to write about a childhood spent in a place where I feel like I didn't have a lot of control. I didn't feel very seen by the people around me for a bunch of reasons. And actually not being seen by the people around you is kind of part of the human condition. But I was 11. I didn't know that. You know, I didn't understand. And mixed in there was a sense of like having a feeling that there was something about me that if people knew that it would be unwelcome, you know, so grappling with queerness at a young age. And so
rural towns also have that extra flavor of isolation growing up.
Yeah, and so it was really this, like, I had all these feelings and I wanted to write about them. And then in order to get the intensity of emotion that I wanted the reader to feel, I realized, like, oh, I have to kill someone. Like, it just seemed like the most direct way to take you to a place where we were dealing with a level of emotion that was where I wanted to hang out, if that makes sense. And so I've talked before about the fact that I didn't really know I didn't set out to write crime, which I worry sounds dismissive or like I don't value that it ended up being crime. But I think it always needed to be crime because I'm really, the thing about crime is it's always life or death. And while I struggle to read crime and I find it quite anxiety inducing, when you're writing it, it's very slow. Like you're not experiencing it at the same kind of tempo, right? And it's sort of, I love fiction that I feel like does justice to the fact that to be human is kind of to suffer, you know. In it, and I think that can be really affirming in that way of if you only ever watch like funny sitcoms or something, or you only ever read fiction that kind of makes you feel like everybody else has everything figured out. I think that can be quite isolating. And so what I love is reading and writing books that kind of do honor to the fact that I think all fiction is grappling with this idea that like there is no right choice. Like we can never know what is the right thing to do. And we listen to stories to kind of role play different choices and what might happen if we do different things. I think it's like at the core, that's what story is. It's someone saying to you, if you eat this berry, you will die. You know, on an evolutionary standpoint, like it's like that's what that part of our brain developed for, I think.
Yeah.
And that's why we pay attention to stories, and that's why we care about them, and that's why we open these books that are pages with little squiggles on them, and then we go into these deep places. It's because we're trying desperately to make the right decision. And if you're a human being, like the right decision is never obvious. And so we're always gathering that information. And so I think the beauty of writing a book is the pain of it is that reading a book feels very simple and very like elegant. And then writing a book is like trying to catch a pig covered in canola oil. But along the way, you get to kind of think through and articulate things that you didn't even really know were in there, because the process takes a while and because you're kind of trying to tell a story that's charming to the reader. But along the way, it ends up being a product of all the things that you're kind of thinking about at that time.
Obviously, it's like the tension between trying to appease a reader and be entertaining while also getting at the feeling that you want to tell the world about, kind of thing. And if those two things kind of like rub up against each other, and I don't know if they have for you, but like if they do, is there a strategy to kind of like prevent yourself from getting so anxious that you shut down and don't write anything at all?
Yeah, I think this idea of to finish a book, I had to kind of almost separate the book and the characters that I'd spent time with writing my first book, which took 6 years and was something there were times where I really thought I wasn't going to be able to finish it and that I would quit and that I wasn't going to do it anymore because it was taking such a toll on my brain. It was sort of, I got to a point where I went, it kind of deserves to be something and I want it to be separate from me. I want it to go out and I want it to speak to other people when I'm not there.
Yeah.
And almost once I had that realization, I feel like I then was able to finish the book. That it didn't actually have to be a reflection of me. It just had to be itself. And that all I was trying to do was finish something that could stand and be in a room that I wasn't in. And that also, funnily enough, really helps when your book comes out and there's a period where you feel like just a naked nerve, you know, and you're just kind of, people are talking about your book and it's nice when they say nice things, but it's sort of disproportionately more horrible when they say bad things, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to remember what you learned about, like, this is a thing that I made, but it's not me. And that is a skill I had to figure it out to finish the book. And it sort of comes in handy. But even now, you have to cultivate that skill, and you have to have a sense of yourself as a person who is worthwhile regardless of what you produce. And you have to try and foster a core of self that is okay and that is not reliant on what you make or what you give, but that you are a person and therefore you are enough. I mean, sorry.
This is now a personal therapy session. How did you do that?
I mean, it's an ongoing work in progress. One thing I'm trying to learn how to do is I got good at working, which took a long time to be able to proceed past that point of like anxiety. You were talking about, Lachlan, where you're just completely paralyzed, right?
Yeah.
Like I was, and I still can get there, but there's something about things that I've worked out that have helped me kind of just get to the page and spend as little time as possible in that really paralyzing state. And I've gotten better at getting out of it, but I got so good at working that I then proportionately found that if I didn't work, I was so miserable. But then I couldn't rest. So I feel like with my second book, I really wanted to learn how to do this thing I'm trying to do at a more human pace and to kind of factor in downtime where I don't have to be doing anything or making anything to be okay. And so like a really good example of that recently is I just went away with my best friend from high school and my partner and my partner's sister. And these are all people that have known me since before I was a writer, before I even knew I wanted to be a writer, right? I wasn't one of those kids who thought they wanted to be a writer. And they just don't really care what I do in
like the nicest way.
Like they're proud of me, but it's just like I'm a version of myself around them that just feels like, oh, I don't actually have to do or make anything. I'm just okay with you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of priceless and hard to find when sometimes, you know, like being able to actually take time off is something I didn't give myself permission to do. And one thing I've learned is that, if you can put self-compassion and even, I just didn't even know what I liked. I didn't even know what I enjoyed. Like I've had to make lists of like, these are the things that Hayley likes. And these are the things she does when she doesn't have to be doing the other things that she wants to happen.
I absolutely love that you have that, because I started writing a list over the last few months of like, these are the things that calm you down. Like you can watch this or you can do this. These are the things that you actually like to do. Because I was finding that when I got to those anxious moments, or when I felt like I needed to rest, but I was too stressed and I was having those issues of value outside productivity and things like that, I would just be so stuck that I didn't know what to do. And then I was like, oh, how embarrassing. You have to have a list of like all the things that you like to do or that calm you down. So I'm so relieved.
And that's a fun stage of the process, isn't it? Where you're beating yourself up for like, why do you need this? Like,
and you think no one else in the world has ever had to write a list of their own enjoyments, and just like, it's only me, I'm the freak.
But like on the flip side, I mean, I know that this isn't the point of the podcast, but this has been eye-opening for me because I don't fucking know what I like. I don't know if I have direction or anything like that. And so I'm gonna write a list, and I don't feel embarrassed by that, actually. I feel affirmed.
It's really helpful to have that list, because often when I come to that list, I'm like in a heightened state of I actually can't think of anything that I like, and that feels so real and so up close. And it's funny how just looking at it on a piece of paper and being like, you know what always works? Watching the BBC Pride and Prejudice. Like you find it impossible to feel sad. One thing I do is it's impossible to listen to Meatloaf's I Would Do Anything for Love, but I won't do that, brackets, from beginning to end and not experience a shift in emotional state. I'm not saying it's up there with like drugs, but it is impossible to enter and leave that song in exactly the same, because it just takes you on a journey, man. And so on a piece of paper, I have like, all right, listen to Meatloaf, I Would Do Anything for Love, and then reassess.
Okay, I'll do that.
I don't know if it will work for anyone else, but that sense of like trying to get some kind of distance when you feel like you and the emotion you're experiencing are the same thing. It's really good to have those cues. And I've sort of developed a rule with writing my second novel. Like I call it the happy idiot approach. And that's like, what would someone who wasn't concerned with doing this in the best or most efficient way do? So writing a second novel has this pressure, right? So I'm like, well, I could sit here and I could think about all the things that I need to do to like be better, faster, stronger, whatever. Or I could just do what a happy idiot would do, which is kind of write what I think maybe happens next and not invest it with that level of pressure.
Right.
And there's something about, it's a bit kind of CBT, right? Like cognitive behavioral therapy. You do things like give your anxiety a name and things like that help you kind of imagine and kind of de-escalate how real that feels.
Yeah.
So that notion of the happy idiot really helps me, because sometimes I'm like, Google what to do when feeling anxious is like something that a happy idiot would do in a way. Like, and unfortunately it's often like go for a walk or try and get more sleep or whatever. Like, damn, those answers again.
What can I take instead?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Like going for a walk or listening to Meatloaf's I Would Do Anything for Love.
I'm so excited to find the like niche overlap in our community that is the BBC Pride and Prejudice and Meatloaf fan club. I'm just so excited to see what comes out of this episode for people to be like, oh my God, me too. Or like what their niche movie and song is. It's just, I'm excited. I'm so excited.
And that's it. It's like we get to discover what makes us tick. Like sometimes flipping it into, oh my God, I am a deeply like flawed human being and I have to make all these accommodations for myself and I should have this all figured out. Is to flip that and go like, I wonder what I enjoy and I wonder what might work for me. And that's something that I'm gently curious about and kind of happy to find out about. And that's not, I really don't want to like positivity, like toxic positivity anyone, because I think sometimes things are just shit and they are just shit and you need to bring in the big guns.
Yeah. But I think that's different. I think that approach is a little bit different than toxic positivity. It's more just like broadening perspectives to
I hope it's different because I think there's something in there about like you don't have to solve it. You just have to find something that might make it feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
And actually there's no expectation that you should have this figured out at this point, because we're all always changing, and we're all you never arrive at being like, okay, I am now content and I will remain at content. Like, that's just not how it works to be human and to have a body and a brain.
Yeah.
I think so many of us think, everyone else has come with a manual, or everyone else knows how their operating system works, because we haven't had a lot of, conversation around mental health until like probably the last few years, really. And still it's so niche that, it can really feel like, oh, well, everyone else has got it worked out. Everyone else is happy and content. And you're just like, I don't know how mine works. Ugh.
I think fiction and TV and like all forms of media have something to say about that, because often you hear a story and you're like, oh, this person likes this person and they're going over there to talk to them. And it's just this kind of, and maybe we can tell they're worried about it or whatever. But like people seem to just think about one thing at once in books. And like, I know why that is. Like, it's hard to show consciousness in another way. But to actually deal with the layers of experience and the layers of emotion and the layers of what's going on for one person in one moment, particularly if you're someone like me who feels like, when someone's like, don't worry about it, and you're like, that's literally never been an option for me ever. Like, I can't not think about something. The idea that I would just be being like, I'm going to go to the store, and then go to the store, and that would be that experience. I love fiction that sort of unfolds and unpacks how much can be kind of happening in your mind. So I've wandered off again, but I do think fiction has that feeling that everyone else is just thinking about one thing and is just kind of doing what they need to do, and not, and sleeping and being content and all those things. It's like not how people actually work.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Except for a few people that nobody likes. I joke.
I'm interested. You talked about, obviously there's a lot of pressure going into a second book. I think, if you're a writer or publisher or, to do with books at all, you kind of understand where everyone's coming from with like your second book. Was it better, worse, different, I guess, coming into writing book 2 when Dirt Town had just smashed everything, just all the awards, all the success? Did that make the imposter syndrome easier? Did it make it harder? Was there more pressure?
It's funny, because I think in many ways Dirt Town was such a difficult book to write. And I feel for people whose first book is easy to write, because I don't think you get a chance to build up the resources to fall back on. So Dirt Town was challenging in all these ways that just gave me all these tools that I could use and got me into active therapy, if nothing else. And, I talked about that happy idiot idea, but I really went in being like, what would someone who just wanted to take this not very seriously do? And the trick, of course, is if you are able, if you can get through that membrane, it often feels like when you sit down to do something you care about, that there's this impenetrable, it's almost see-through, you can see what you're meant to be doing, but it's just to push through and actually begin is so difficult. And I told myself I just have to write a shit second book. That was the goal. I just had to write a really bad second book. That's all I had to do to meet my contractual obligations. Right to a point where they just looked the other way and just accepted it and let me keep the money, but didn't actually have to publish it. So that was kind of what I had to tell myself to be able to begin. And then there comes a point where the characters start to take on a bit of a life of their own, and you realize I actually want, kind of like what happened with Dirt Town. I wanted this story to exist outside of me, because it felt like these characters deserved to have the space that they needed to do what they were going to do, if that makes sense. But it takes a lot of, my writing motto is kind of get down low and go, go, go. I often use a time-based metric, which I know you do too, Jacinta. You have your pearls in the jar, which I
do.
Love. And so it's much less scary to tell yourself, okay, I have to sit here for half an hour today. And I'm not allowed to do anything else, and the internet is off, and your book is open, but you just have to sit here. There is sort of, no one's going to force you to write. And of course, given a couple minutes at it, you kind of are able to go, well, if I'm going to be here for half an hour anyway, maybe I'll add that stupid sentence that doesn't make sense anyway. But then once you've got that sentence, you can kind of cantilever from that, and you are in the thing that you're trying to do, and you're not outside it looking at yourself, calling yourself an idiot, And I really feel like one of my every book has its own goals. I think you're like trying to do certain things. And I started thinking about it as a question of craft, actually. Like, this is something that a writer needs to do to be a good writer. And so number one on my list was like, be kind to yourself, which doesn't sound very sexy. But if you like start with that, then everything else is kind of a bit more possible. Because if you were working for a boss who's like, you're an idiot, you need to write a really good sentence right now, versus a boss who's like, hey, I'm glad you're here. I wonder what you're going to come up with today. It's a different kind of thing. And so self-talk is something that I still struggle with. I still find it. And also, like, I find it because of my sense of humor. I also think there is something about sarcasm and like self-deprecation that's just enjoyable, right? Like, I don't want to be all Pollyanna about it, but I have learned that if I can find a way to be curious about what might happen instead of like, oh my God, this better be good, loser, then things are better. Like, you can sink deeper into something than you can.
I really like that as a kind of a mantra, I guess. The thing that I have a problem with, well, when I try to do writing or anything really, is that I'll have the internal critic doing its best to bring me down. Then I will try the self-talk to make myself feel a little bit better and, be kind to myself. And then it's almost as if there's this, that meme of the people in the church and they've got guns pointed at one another, and I don't know. I'll post the meme up online and everyone will know what I'm talking about. But basically, I feel as though that there is this third internal critic that's waiting in the wings for my kind self to come along and say, "No, you idiot, get back in your box."
Oh, buddy.
And I think every writer experiences that. And, Anne Lamott, who wrote Bird by Bird, which is one of my favorite like writing advice books, talks about almost imagining each of those voices, those negative voices. So it might be the voice of a parent who's like, you're never going to achieve this. That's the example she gives, and different voices of like, wow, you think that's a good sentence. And she imagines them like mice in a jar, and she puts them in the jar and she puts the lid on, which is a very CBT thing to do, I think. And it's like, you're here and you're there and you're in the jar, and I'm just going to be doing what I'm doing and you're going to be there, which is easier said than done. There's definitely been days where I've been too elevated or too, like, I haven't been able to sink down into that place and be able to successfully do that. And sometimes you have to call that and let yourself. I love really cold water. That's one thing that works for me as a bit of a reset. So
as
sometimes
like a drink or in a shower?
No, as in like I go and jump in the ocean. I live in Wollongong, and there's ocean pools that are free and kind of open all the time, even when it's really cold. And they're amazing because you literally cannot have a coherent thought about how crap you are because you're just trying to breathe.
Yeah.
I know I think you had someone on who was really into heat. I feel like people either fall into like they like to go into a sauna or something, or they enjoy that.
Yeah.
Maybe it was, or if you can handle the cold, there's really something about that reset. I know your mum likes cold water, Jacinta.
I know, what a weirdo. Absolutely not.
So yeah, I think if you hate it, that's fine. There are like other ways you can do that, right? But this idea of if I can just find a way to sit here, I don't actually have to do that much else. I just have to find a way to sit here. And that's as much pressure as I'm going to kind of put on myself. And I think I had to figure out a way, because I wrote my first novel as part of a PhD, I had this deadline from very early on without really having any sense that I knew how to write a book. And so there was this incredible like high crescendo point. Like I pushed past the point I would have by myself because it just had to be done. And my supervisor kept asking to see things. So I had to kind of figure out that to go and jump in cold water, and I had to like run until I was so physically tired that I could sit, or I had to whatever and push through that. And then there is an element of the hard thing about talking, like when you are on a podcast talking about how to do this stuff, the answer is like, now that I've written a book, everything is easier because every time I go, oh, I wonder if I can do this, there's like Dirt Town sitting on the shelf behind me. Yeah. And it's really hard to fake that. It's really hard to substitute that. And it is just incredibly hard to be doing something when there is no guarantee of success and no guarantee that anybody really wants to hear what you have to say.
It does seem like you have a bit of a pattern, though, where you get yourself stuck into like a contract or a PhD, and then you're like, well, I got to figure out how to do it now.
Yeah, and look, I think a lot of writers do that. The thing with me is I was really lucky that I had friends who had just done their second book thing, and I saw the incredible stress they were under in terms of the timelines that they agreed to. And I just was very clear from the beginning, like, I think I can do this. Like, I think I can write another book, but I'm not going to do it in a year, which is very standard for crime and would have been probably what they wanted if I hadn't pushed back. And it was funny because I think it was still less time than that it had taken me to write the first book. But it was like, okay, that the fact that I felt like I had enough time to do it was important to me because I've never been a very good like late night, last minute person. So it was, and it helped because I'm like, I literally just have to do an hour a day or 2 hours a day. And I worked up, it took me, I've always really struggled to sit still. I still struggle to sit still for more than 15 minutes. There's still something in my body that is just like physically wants me to get up and walk away from whatever it is I'm doing. So
a desk job like writing, just 10 out of 10 for you.
And so I use this timer that it's used in particular for like children and bath time. So it like shows you how much time is remaining, and it's like a big visual thing. So you see the piece of pie like getting smaller, kind of thing. And I put it somewhere I can see it, and I only ever have to work for half an hour at a time, and then I'm allowed to move around, and then I do another half hour. And over time, I've been able to get up to working several hours a day, but I never really write more than 3 hours a day. Like that is the limit of my capacity. And that's taken me, I've been writing for 9 years at this point, and I still at my absolute full pelt, not doing any other work at the moment. This is my full-time job. I can still only do 3 hours of creative production a day.
Right.
And, you know, and it used to be 15 minutes, like was all I could sit there. But then once had sort of could do that, and I slowly built up over time, having that under your belt helps you be less anxious as well. Like all of it helps. I'm also a big believer in like, if your brain feels like you have a viable plan for what it is you're trying to do, you can kind of get your body and your focus on board a bit more. So I was like, okay, I can't sit here for 8 hours, which is how I thought you would write a book. But maybe I could do half an hour for the next 5 days of this week and then see. And so I would just track that time, and then over time I would build it up. But that's I think everyone has their own way of figuring out how to do it. But it wasn't until I was pushed by having this feeling of like, okay, if you can just do a little bit every day, that will be better than just spiraling for months at a time.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember who it was. When I was at university, they showed us a graphic of the amount of time per day certain like classic writers, not even just classic writers, but, you know, writers from the 18th century up to, I guess, the 1900s would spend on their work. And it was something like, I forget which one it was, but they spent maybe 12 hours a day locked in this small dark room writing until there was enough done. And that didn't even get up to eat or anything like that. And I'm like, well, shit, that person, you know, has gone on to become a celebrated author, but I can't even remember the name of.
That's so cool. I'm just reading a book called Rest by Alex Pang, and it talks about the neuroscience of creativity. And if you look at most people's maximum effort is like 3 hours a day.
Yeah. It makes sense. That's about as much as I can do.
Yeah. And people who learn how to rest and how to find the time of day that works best for them. And a lot of creative, anxious people, which is a Venn diagram, which is a circle. A lot of creative, anxious people find that working first thing in the morning when they're tired, which is what I do, I always write first thing in the morning, allows them to kind of, I think of it as like my inner critic, that voice that you were talking about, Lachlan, hasn't woken up yet.
Yeah,
And so I've got just enough cognitive function to like get myself into the scene before that voice inside me that tells me that I'm wasting everybody's time and that anything I write will be completely shit. It's kind of like still waking up. And then
I think Catherine Collette does a similar thing.
I think a lot of writers do that. And it may not be and often they're people who would consider themselves night owls. Like I feel most awake in the evening and I want to stay up. But if I can get myself in a routine where I'm waking up in the morning with enough time to do 3 hours of work by lunchtime, and then once I've had lunch, I'm like done. I've done my creative output and I can fritter away the rest of the day with all the stuff that seems to fill my time.
Yeah, right.
Then that's kind of that's the schedule that I've landed on. Like if I can not go on the internet and not talk to anyone until lunchtime, then I can write a novel in a few years. And that might seem really slow to some people, but also it works for me. And so, yeah, and I think that idea of just working with and finding out what works for you and then being responsive and kind of, I've always been endlessly fascinated by people's routines, and some people have really crazy ones. But the more I talk to actual creatives that I know, the more I feel like the people who are able to be like, yeah, I do 20 minutes 6 days a week and that's all I can do right now, but I do that at a time when my brain seems to work the best. And the best may not be like the most switched on and caffeinated. The best may actually just be, no, I actually get words on the page for whatever reason, because I'm tired or because I know my children are going to be home or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that is the work of being a writer. Like, if you can just find a way to sit there, everything else will come, in my experience, because we all have something to say. We all have something to, we all had a feeling once, and now people are going to have to hear about it.
I love that so much, and that is absolutely going on a post-it note above my desk because it really does absolutely capture like why we book, why we read, why we write. I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's the whole thing. That's all of it.
I'm glad you like it, Jacinta.
How do you come back to editing, especially if you do like the morning writing and stuff like that? How do you then come back to editing and not slip back into those old habits? I've found that I can get, this is basically just a therapy session for me now. But like I can get a first draft out fine, and then because like the goal is, well, you just have to make a shit first draft, that's fine, whatever.
Yeah, and then the awful stage where you're like, crap, now I have to contend with my shit first draft.
Yeah.
What have I done?
Yeah. How do you crush the inner critic while you're trying to fix said draft? Because then you're actually aiming for something like coherent and decent, and then
it's that hard, like that is the hard nugget or the hard core, like the impossible problem of being a writer. And George Saunders has an image that I find so useful of every writer has a gauge mounted in their forehead, right? And it's like one of those sort of yes, no, it's like an applausometer almost. So if it's like an idea is good, it will go towards yes. And if something is bad, it'll go towards no. And I think the biggest struggle when you're trying to write something is this idea of you want it to be good, like you have good taste, you know what you're kind of shooting for in a way. But the sad reality is to get to a finished product, you literally have to hold everything up to that gauge and feel if it goes yes or no. And some things will remain neutral and you have to return to them. And that's kind of editing. It's like, what do you think of this, forehead? And then and that is unfortunately the process. And I think for me, a big part of my editing process is also getting the opinion of other people. So I will work on Girl Falling. I worked for 2 years to get a complete draft, and I finished the story. And unlike with Dirt Town, I didn't let anyone read it because I had a sense of, I think often when you share your work early when you're starting out because you just need someone to tell you you're not crazy, like you do have something to say, or there is something interesting about this thing. And I kind of had got more trust that, okay, I just need to actually finish this so that people can help me make it better. I don't need them to tell me that I can write a paragraph. I would still like people to tell me that I can write a paragraph, but I didn't need it as badly as I did when I was writing my first book. And so I took the 2 years and I kind of finished the draft. And I think of a draft as something that I work on until someone reads it and then tells me what they got from it. And then I'm like, okay, if that's what you think the story is, this is how I'm going to respond to that. And so much of writing and editing for me is like figuring out what it is the story is actually about, because I never seem to know at the beginning.
Yep.
So yes, it is that thing of we have the rhythm of the sentence, or, you know, is this a line that we like, or all of that is happening in your brain while you're editing. And then at a certain point you give it to someone and they're like, why does this happen? You know, and you're able to respond to that. And you just kind of, we think of revision as this like almost like it goes through this revision process, like a piece of luggage goes through the scanner at the airport and it comes out either clean or not clean, you know, or like dangerous items inside or not. And it's more like tending a garden, you know, like you've planted these seeds and they've grown, and some things need to be cut back and some things need more nitrogen and some things need less nitrogen and more water and less water. And like, it is an organic thing. And that is what's hard about that part of the process. So once you've cleared that hurdle of getting a shit draft down, then you have to learn how to be a gardener and how to back your own opinion too. That's the one thing that's gotten faster between books, is that I just got better at saying, I think this and I'm going to do this.
Right.
instead of like leaving all my options open.
Well, fair enough. You have a shitload of awards behind you to be like, I clearly can do something.
And look, I like didn't have those until I had them, which is a really like dumb way to say that. But I just mean it never once in my entire life felt like I was writing an award-winning book. It never even felt like I was writing a book that would be published. Like I never felt good about writing Dirt Town. I was never like, just another page in my award-winning novel. The truth is you make something and you give it everything you can, and then it goes out, and then weirdly, like 2 years later, someone in a room is like, good. And then they give you a sticker to put on the book. And it's so kind of, I know that feeling of like, that feels like you must almost know that. Like there must be something about that like flows back in time and like makes you feel good. And the answer is no. I never felt good about the book in that way. I have learned how to have more of a like craft person's approach to it, which is I've done everything I can. I've sanded the edges as best I can. I've tested it for sturdiness. I've given it to other craftspeople to look at, and I'm proud that it exists. And like I've gotten to that point with my second book, I think. But you're never like, yes, just another paragraph in my amazing body of work. You know, that's not how it feels to make something. And if it doesn't feel like that, it doesn't mean anything. You know, like it's just meaningless information, like your response and how you feel about your work. And it's not meaningless to win awards. I definitely don't mean that, because they are like something I can cling to in the dark nights of the soul. Like maybe I said something that spoke to someone, but they're not helpful at the time where you really need the help, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is surprising and reassuring to hear you speak about it like that, though, because I think, you know, just to have my own little Hayley rave moment, you make it look so effortless on the page. Like everything you write is so well written and just so beautifully crafted. And I was still so angry at the end of Girl Falling that I thought I knew what was happening the whole time, and you still surprised me. And so to hear that, you know, you're still like, oh, nah, oh, I don't know what I'm doing.
And that's
sometimes
the voice I talk to myself in too.
Obviously.
No, it's true. Like I'm not making fun of you. That is literally what the voice. And my favorite writing advice, like the most stellar piece of writing advice, comes to us from patron saint Dolly Parton, and she says, you know, it costs a lot of money to look this cheap. And I think that's what good writing does. Like there's this, I was talking before, like reading a book feels effortless and it feels like charming and it feels like a gift. And that's because the person at the other end has kind of sweated and questioned their own sanity and questioned all their life decisions and, you know, been hard to be around and been in physical pain and been like unable to eat or sleep, you know. And I've learned also that no one can tell the difference between a paragraph I wrote on a day where for whatever reason I was feeling good and I just like banged it out and I was like, oh, that'll do as a placeholder for now. Sometimes you end up keeping those paragraphs and no one can tell the difference between that and the one that you spent like 6 months on, whatever for. And that's okay. That's just part of the process. And that is why readers are so important, because they come back and are like, oh, yes, this is charming. I find this interesting, or this feels like what the story might be about. But it's sort of, when I say it doesn't matter how you feel, I guess I mean like the reader can't tell how you feel if you do your job. By the end, they will just feel like this is a story that existed, that needed to be transmuted into them reading it or listening to it. And that's the magic of it. And no one knows how much you suffer. So why lessen your suffering if you can and just be like, I'm just going to try, you know? And the book, the second book was easier because of that feeling of having the knowledge, like, oh, nobody really could tell the difference. And so why don't I just try and enjoy it a bit more? And some writers talk about writing like they enjoy it, and I think they're lying.
Yeah, I have to agree.
I think they're lying too.
But I think it's like, what can I do to make this, you know, little rituals, like how can I kind of ease myself into this and how can I give myself as much of a break as possible? And part of that is deciding what you're going to do and the bare minimum that, like the amount that you can comfortably do every day and commit to doing that. And I always take weekends off. I learned that from my PhD, because otherwise you just, your brain turns into soup and you don't have any friends anymore and nobody.
Well, that's kind of what I found when I was doing my honours thesis. It wasn't so much like trying to find ways to make it easier. It was more I have to trick myself into doing this work and have like some sort of recompense at the end. And then everything else that happened either side of doing that work was pure relaxation with a little bit of mania, which is fun.
Well,
I don't know.
Rest and work are opposite sides of the same coin. Like, you can't have one without the other. And so
Yeah.
to do something big that you care about, you're probably going to have to learn how to rest just as much as you're going to have to learn how to work.
Rude, what a personal attack, Eddie.
And I know them feels. I'm someone who'll be sitting there reading a book, and I'm like watching myself reading a book from outside, being like, I'm reading a book, I'm doing it. And then you're like, fuck, I haven't actually read the thing. And then I'm already thinking about 10 other things that I should be doing. So, yeah, easier said than done. But I think finding a way to just be like, I'm a person who has things that I enjoy, and I also make time for this thing I care about. But once I've done that minimum time I'm committed to, like, I'm free to be a person after that. It's amazing how much quicker that will write a book than, oh my God, I must be producing 12 hours a day and I must be brilliant, you know. Yeah.
This is one of my favorite conversations. I've learned so much.
I feel it might be a bit
Same.
niche. I don't know. I find the writing stuff endlessly fascinating, and I've been through such a process learning how to just sit in a chair and give myself permission to write that I could talk about stuff endlessly.
But I mean, yes, certain things are niche about the writing process and everything, but in many ways, I think that sort of sitting in an uncomfortable situation and like having acceptance for it, but also like treating yourself with kindness and all that kind of stuff, all of this is very, very important and applicable to anxiety on the whole. I think it's a really good approach to it, rather than, I guess, I'm trying to think of other ways that I've been treated for anxiety aside from medication.
Just someone screaming at you, no, don't have anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. So what have you got to worry about? It's that kind of thing.
Oh, because that always super helps when someone's like, you know, other people have it worse than you. You're like, amazing. I'm cured. I instantly feel great.
I definitely don't feel worse now that you've brought up the fact that I'm complaining while there's someone else who's having a worse time. Great. Thank you.
And that's it. Like, I think it comes back to that idea we were talking about at the very beginning. Like, no one really has an operating manual, and we're all just trying to figure it out. And the more compassionate you can be to yourself, the more compassionate you can be to other people, I think, at the end of the day. And like, maybe writing a book is kind of a form of compassion. Like, if anyone ever reads something I wrote and feels marginally more seen or entertained, even, like, it doesn't have to be anything that profound, but it's like, at least I've kind of done something that I think is of value. And that's the best thing about publishing a book, because usually to get to that point, you are someone who believes that books are powerful and that they matter, and you get to be part of something, and you never fully buy into the fact that your book matters. Like, unfortunately, that never comes. That never arrives. But you do get to be part of this thing that you think is really important, and that's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. And speaking of things that are pretty cool, in your travels, in your time on this planet, and being a creative person and just a person in general, what pieces of media have you found to have been really good representations of mental health, as broad as mental health, as acute as anxiety, and even other resources?
Thank you for that question. Flawless segue. In answer to that question, I think there's one short story that has stayed with me. It's a story called 5 Signs of Disturbance by Lydia Davis, who is a writer I love. And it's this sort of perfect rendering of what that feeling of being anxious and so overstimulated that you're finding it hard to do anything. And it's specifically about moving, which is something that any time I've had to do has sent me into just a state of such overwhelm and such kind of, for reasons still unknown to me. I mean, my therapist and I have kind of figured out why. Maybe, we have a working theory. But for whatever reason, moving has always been so incredibly overstimulating that I feel like I'm just vibrating in place. Like, I'm doing nothing but thinking and yet getting nowhere and doing nothing. 5 Signs of Disturbance by Lydia Davis. So yeah, that is a story that I wish it was I actually find it very difficult to consume content about anxiety, because it can be quite anxiety inducing.
Yeah,
but I think that story captured it perfectly and is a great little nugget And it's about watching yourself while you kind of have a bit of a breakdown.
Right.
Like being within and also without at the same time. I also want to take this opportunity to apologise to you, Jacinta, because
What have you done?
had teeth stuff happening in June, I believe, and I feel like I may. And you've had the lovely dentist on. Is it Dr. Romy Fried?
Yep.
Yeah.
Talking about teeth, and then there is a scene in my. I feel like I need a warning for the scene in my book that is set at the dentist, because I am incredibly afraid of the dentist, and so I channeled all that into this one scene that I feel.
I found that really interesting. One, it's a creepy scene, but I actually quite like the dentist. Like I fall asleep in the chair. I'm totally fine.
That makes no sense to me whatsoever.
No, I don't know. I'm terrible with needles, but if you're anesthetic in my mouth, who cares? It just feels like a corn chip gone wrong. I don't know.
Yeah.
Everything is different when it comes to my teeth. I have a freakishly high pain tolerance, is what my dentist used to tell our friends.
My dentist tells me I salivate a lot, which is, weird flex. But and dentists are always keen to tell me that it's really good, that it's good for your oral hygiene to be someone that salivates a lot, but they fail to understand that you're drowning in your own saliva while they're trying to do what they need to do. And so I think this is, if nothing else, I hope I've captured that in the book.
Yeah.
This is the only way I'll refer to you now. It's Hayley Scrivenor, author of Dirt Town and Girl Falling, an extensive salivator.
Oh, great.
8 out of 10 dentists say that she's got perfect oral hygiene.
This seems like as good a note as any to thank you, Hayley, for coming on the show.
Much.
This has genuinely been so helpful to me personally. I don't even care if anyone else likes it or not. I've had fun. Lachlan's had fun. I'm now feeling so much better about all of my writing things. It's just been, you're just so full of wisdom. I'm so angry that you're so crafty, so great at writing, and can articulate it all just so beautifully. Just, what are you bad at, Hayley? Before we leave, what are you bad at?
You're benefiting from a decade of overthinking. So,
yeah, okay, fair enough.
And I want to say how honoured I am to be part of what you guys are doing, because I think now more than ever that the ability to put something on and feel connected to people and feel like we're all in this together is incredibly special and has been a source of solace. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice. Also, I want to point out, everyone should read Girl Falling when it's out, which it will be by the time this episode is out, because you will get not only an excellent story with some really, really interesting characters, but a lot of descriptions, not the same as, but very akin to like trying to catch a pig covered in canola oil. The metaphors are amazing. I love them.
Yes.
And the story does absolutely provide what it says in the title.
Oh, yeah.
I love you posted that thing of you bought a book called you had my book and then you also received And Then She Fell. So
Alicia Elliott's one.
And I was like, well, that's the book. That's, that's the whole plot.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things of reading Girl Falling alongside Lachlan was that both of us assumed that the title was going to be relatively metaphorical, and then within that first chapter we were like, okay, yep, sure. And we were just absolutely bamboozled that for people who generally think quite literally, the fact that you still surprised us with a literal girl falling, that I don't think that's a spoiler.
No,
it's in
not
the
at
first
all.
chapter.
It's very much in the sort of jacket copy and
correct.
Yeah.
But we absolutely loved that we hadn't read the jacket copy. We were just like, it's a Hayley book, let's go. And to then actually we were like, oh wow, this is maybe one of the first times ever that we've come in thinking pure metaphor and actually got a literal thing. Well done. Surprise from start to end, honestly.
Yeah. Thank you again, Hayley, and thank you everyone for listening to us talk and laugh and say things without knowing how they will actually turn out, like this sentence. If you want to listen to more episodes, then you probably should. You can find them all where you're listening to this one. Join our Facebook community group. Look at our Instagram stuff. I do so much for you guys. I do so much for you. And just have a good one, I guess. Peace.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us for another episode of Differently Brained. If you want to learn more about something that we talked about today, head to our show notes. If you want to hang out with us, yay, thanks! You can join our private Facebook group where we chat all things podcast, mental health, and neurodivergence in a safe and warm community. If Facebook isn't your thing, fair enough. You can find us on Instagram at Differently Brained Podcast. And while you're there, Lachlan and I would also love a follow on our personal pages too if you're in the mood. If you want to get in touch with us via email, we are differentlybrainedpodcast@gmail.com.
Differently Brained shares the opinions of individuals and does not consider your personal circumstances. Differently Brained exists purely for information purposes and should not be relied on as health or medical advice. Because no brain is the same, please consult your healthcare professional for your personal medical needs.